Well, howdy, folks. James from Political Friar coming at you again. Today, we're going to talk about an area of the world that many of you probably haven't heard of. It's called Nagorno Karabakh. Yeah, that's right. Nagorno Karabakh. I worked on that pronunciation because I was aware of it, had never said those words out loud. What it is it's a previously autonomous oblast in the territory of Azerbaijan. And what makes it interesting is that it is populated by Armenians, which Armenia lies just to the west of Azerbaijan in the Caucasus region between Turkey and Russia. All of that said, this conflict should be important to all of us because it is a symptom of what may be coming. Let me tell you about the conflict, though, the quick history. It started, as so many things do, at the end of the Russian Revolution in 1923. The Soviets had to figure out how they were going to administer all of these previous Russian Empire territories that they had taken over. And the Russian Empire had separate administrative units, but the Soviets were a union of Soviet socialist republics. So you better have some Soviet socialist republics to be a union with, right? So they created Azerbaijan and Armenia as separate republics. The problem was Karabakh is 95% Armenian. So it had to have its own governing unit, and it became a autonomous oblast. That's oblast is basically a province, and the Soviets more or less kept the lid on any simmering tensions between the Azeris and the Armenians until they couldn't. That was 1988, 3 years before the fall of the Soviet Union. Note, 1988, Armenians and Azeris started killing each other over this territory. Big war started in 1991 after the Soviet Union officially dissolved, and it lasted for nearly 3 years. Thousands died. Armenia won. Armenia expanded the territory and secured de facto independence under Armenian guidance for the territory, while the border never actually moved because in the 90s you didn't move international borders by force, even if they kind of moved de facto. So after 1994, you had a peace of sorts, really a ceasefire that the Russians more or less imposed on the two parties, and that included Armenia being in de facto control, but titularly the Azeris had the territory, and in actuality, it was local Karabakh citizens who were actually governing themselves. This is a knot that wasn't going to get untied. Everybody just stopped fighting because the big people around them said they didn't want them to do it. And when the Russians and the Americans and the Turks and the Iranians all agree on something, usually it happens. I mean, if you can get those people to agree. Come September 2020, we had a pandemic for about 6 months, and everybody's more than just a little distracted. Russia, in particular, was suffering thousands of deaths, and it was not in any position to engage. But Azerbaijan was, and the Azerbaijani president launched a new war, a new big war. Tens of thousands of people died, and the Azeris won big. And so the Armenians lost their ability to directly control Karabakh, but the problem with the Azeri victory is it didn't remove the problem. Karabakh still was Armenian and was still de facto governing itself. And even though Armenia couldn't really help it anymore, that didn't move all the Armenians out. It didn't fix it. What ended up happening was the Russians did come in eventually, and they created a corridor between Armenia and Karabakh. It's called the Lachin corridor. And the Russians said they would supervise it. They would keep the Azeris from fiddling with it and allow the Armenians to live in some kind of awkward peace inside of Azerbaijan. And then Russia declared war on Ukraine. And they, much like the coronavirus pandemic, got a touch distracted. And Azar did what they did. They attacked Armenia. in September of 2022, they fought a 3 day war. Hundreds of people died, maybe 1,000. But it wasn't really against Armenia per se. It was judging Russia's reaction, and Russia did nothing. Russia was a touch distracted. And so by December, Azar went further. They found themselves struck with a protest along the Lachin corridor somehow, and who knows how those protesters got there and why they were blocking all the traffic between Armenia and Karabakh. Huh. And then in April, the veil got taken off, and Azerbaijan just set up a checkpoint and started interdicting supplies from Armenia to Karabakh. And that checkpoint eventually got stricter and stricter and stricter and stricter until it was a blockade. And the Azaris said, just buy all your food, fuel, and water from us. We'll send it to you from the east, from Azerbaijan, but you're not getting anything from Armenia. And the local Armenians said, well, that's not going to work for us. We are Armenian. We want to be Armenian, and we want to have contact with Armenia. And Azar said, no. Peace talks abound. Secretary Blinken went there for 4 days. The Russians and the Turks and the Iranians all agreed that Azerbaijan should knock it off, and they didn't. On September 19th of this year, Azerbaijan invaded Karabakh and 2 days occupied it. And they told the remaining Armenians, get out. It's about 120,000 Armenians that were told they had to move. This is a war crime. It's technically a genocide. That word has a legal definition that is not nearly as nasty as its connotation, although it's still pretty nasty. It's the forcible removal of a cognizable group of people from their territory. So they got told, get out, go to Armenia, and 80% of them have. Over the previous month or so, you've seen, what is that? That's almost 100,000 people who just left. A little over 100,000 people who had to move, and that has been a humanitarian and political nightmare. So why does all this matter? Why does this matter to you, an American, probably, or at least a Westerner who's consuming this in English? Well, it matters because it's a symptom of the breakdown of the international order. The rules-based international order has kept the peace since World War II, and you had participants in this rules-based international order, such as the United States and the Soviet Union, and they were all for it. Everybody benefited from the idea that you didn't change national borders by use of force, and now you do. So see it as a canary in this coal mine that Azerbaijan was sufficiently unrestrained to cut this knot instead of untying it, and be a little worried. But it also goes to something that President Biden addressed in his Oval Office speech last week, that these conflicts and these disruptions, while not strictly connected, are all symptoms of the same thing. And that's a breakdown of the international norms. And that could be a function of reduced American interest in international norms. Make no mistake, Donald Trump's isolationism and the Republican Party faction of the Republican Party, relatively small faction of the Republican Party that's intent on navel gazing on domestic only affairs to the expense of any attention paid to foreign affairs, has hurt America's security. More, Joe Biden's decision to get out of Afghanistan has hurt American security. When you are weak, the people who want to change things by force will do so. Just ask the Armenians. When Russia got weak, it stopped enforcing the rules of the international norms, and Azerbaijan took advantage. It's a matter of a breakdown of norms, not necessarily good guys and bad guys. It's what is acceptable in the international community. And it is now acceptable, thanks Russia, for people to change borders by force of arms. It might happen more now. Anyway, It's just a thought. Tell me how wrong I am in the comments down below. Please, like and subscribe. I know this was a little bit longer, but it's a history thing, so I had to do a bit more thorough job. But I hope you liked it. Anyway, thanks.